Hi, namaste, and welcome to Breakout with me, Abha. Thank you so much for watching. You know, we are committed on this show to bring to you exceptional game changers, people who have been the mavericks, the rule makers, and the rule breakers. And guess what? They have agreed to share with us their insights to demystify this whole rules game, to let us know how to break out of what we think is limiting and break into something what we think is absolutely necessary for us. From them, we learn that there is only one rule to life, and that is that there are no rules to life. We just make them up all on the way. My guest today, he is an adventurer and an executive and has run numerous companies and spoken around the world on brand building, adventuring, leadership, entrepreneurship, and the human side of management. He's been highlighted on national television and in publications like the Business Week, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Inc. magazine, Success, and San Francisco Focus magazine. He's the founder, and let me tell you what he does. He's the founder of the North Face, which has gone into a 2.5 billion operation, and he has served as the president and CEO of this company for 20 years. As part of this company was honored with many awards for being the best managed company in its industry, including being lauded by Business Week magazine for providing one of the highest quality products of any company in the United States. Please welcome Hap Klopp. How are you, Hap?
Fine, Eva. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
I'm delighted, and I'm so excited to speak to you because I really do want to learn some things from you. You've been there at North Face for more than 20 years and 2.5 billion. Now, I am your student. Please take us into where it all started. How did you get into that space? Because I understand that you've also worked, initially you worked with your dad's company for a while.
That's correct.
Right? And so what really happened? Where did it begin? Give us a background into where you started. Now, I see you have so much experience. I'm just looking forward to listening to you.
Well, I'll try to briefly state it. It's a lengthy story.
I know.
But it started when I was at Stanford. I went to Stanford as an undergraduate, and my father died while I was in school. And as a result, I ended up running a family company about 900 miles away from schools. So I would commute back and forth between the two, trying to basically learn as I go, run the company. And I did that. It was my senior year. And I concluded while I was running it that we weren't competitive because we weren't large enough. And it was an industry, it was wood products, windows, frames, sash, and things. But we were competing against giants who had much greater resources. So I concluded that I was going to have to sell the company. So while I spent the next 9 months doing that while I was getting the first part of my MBA at Stanford. And in between the first and second year, I concluded the sale of the company, at which point I thought there would be tons of people offering me a chance to run their business, because here I had a Stanford MBA and also I had the opportunity to have run a company already, but nobody offered it to me. So I ended up having to start my own. And I had what I described as that NC2A look, no clue at all, but I knew I wanted to run something.
Right.
And so I looked at the things that I knew. I really kind of limited it to 4 areas, and one of those areas was sport. I had spent a lot of time in sport, the outdoors, when I lived in Spokane, because that's what you do in that region of the northwest of the U.S.
Right.
And so I felt I knew something about the product. I had an affinity to the product. So that became the genesis of the business that we launched. Right. And we took over a couple of stores that existed. The reason we did that was that we knew we were going to create a new product entirely different. It was what they now call disruptive. at that time. It wasn't a word that we used a lot, but we knew we were going to create products that had never been seen before in the form we made them. And they were much more expensive. We didn't know how long it was going to take for people to grasp what we were doing. So by having the stores, it allowed us to have some cash flow. We were selling other people's products as well while we were getting there. And we did that. I mean, basically what we did is we applied technology to the established field of camping. We took materials from the Vietnam War, and they were aircraft aluminum, which we made tent poles and pack frames out of, and parachute cloth. And the parachute cloth became tent tops and sleeping bags and some funky clothing. And as a result of that, we lightened the load that a camper would carry by about 50%. And so people then, instead of going 200 feet into the wilderness, suddenly were going miles. And women joined the fray because it was no longer a beast of burden act. And it ended up that we created a whole new industry. And that industry it is now called backpacking. But at the time, it was a very small subset of camping. And of course, we wove into that a number of adventure activities. We were involved in mountaineering, rock climbing, and later on, extreme skiing. And then it expanded to trail running and a variety of other things. And just to update on what you said, I ran the company for 20 years, but I've sold it. It's now owned by the VF Corporation. They have a number of companies, including Timberland, Vans, and some others. So I periodically go back and see them. In fact, they had a store opening here locally on Friday of last week, and they invited me down to show my gray hair or whatever. But it was always fun to do. But they're doing a great job with what I had. But what we started out, we had no concept that it was going to be that large.
Right.
Our idea was to make the best product, and we assumed that if we could maybe make it up to $10 million in sales and make $1 million a year, that was okay. But we had a lot of philosophies which we insinuated into what we were doing because we felt the qualitative side of business was as important as the quantitative side. And we had different concepts than other people. We believed in the environment long before it became trendy to do that. So we had a lifetime warranty on our product because we believed a product that lasts forever was even more environmental than something using recycled materials.
Absolutely.
We also believed in diversity. We wanted to hire the best people. So we ended up speaking 14 different languages in our factories when we developed it, so we could hire people from wherever in the world, so we could get the best to be able to be involved in that. And we also believed in making a product which was the best, a product for an extreme part of the market. And we believed in word-of-mouth advertising to be able to influence other people as opposed to try to hammer them over the head with an expensive ad campaign.
Right. I think this is truly innovative, like to pick up stuff from the war zone and to bring it into something totally new. I think it's innovative, it's disruptive, and truly like you started a new industry altogether. You created a brand out of that. Which is what a lot of people today in this time and age, it's important for your brand to stand out. And you were back then. I mean, I don't remember because I don't think I was around doing business then. But whatever I've read, branding was not like the way we talk about branding today. But you did it 20 years ago. North Face was a brand to reckon with. And how did that come about? Because you talked about a lot of stuff that you did in the company, for the company, within the company, which is sounding like, oh my God, this wasn't heard of then. And how did the branding bit come about?
Well, hopefully the branding that exists now in some ways may have flown from some of the things we did. I had the good fortune to have somebody act as chairman of our company for the first few years we were there. And he was an expert in branding in the cosmetics world, knew nothing about backpacking, camping, but he ran a company, Charles of the Ritz, Lanvin, and they were also involved with Yves Saint Laurent and Vidal Sassoon. So I had some advice from some people who knew a bit about brand, but then we applied our own approach. And our approach to branding was all about having a very simplified message. There's over 500,000 registered brands in the world right now.
Right.
And so to presume you're going to rise above that with an ad campaign that you could afford is probably illogical. And what we knew is if we could do idiosyncratic things that were tied to the DNA of our company
Right.
that and very tightly focused on it, it'd be great. So, and I use the same technique when I consult with companies and whatever, but what we did was constantly, and that was about every 2 years, have a strategic planning meeting. We would make sure that we were able to identify the DNA of the company. And really, we boiled it down to about 3 words that we used and made sure that everything we did was consistent with that. Then what we did was try to exemplify that in every aspect of what we did so that we would be able to get the word out to the world. So, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things is we didn't have a large advertising budget, nor did we think it would work. So, after much internal debate and arguments about whether it was right or not, we decided we would put our name, our logo on our product. Right. Some of us thought it was a bit much, but what we said was, the best advertising we're going to have is a great product. So we put the logo on the product itself so that every time somebody saw one, they knew where to go to get another one. Right. And so that was an element. The second thing is that we believed in quality. So we came up with a lifetime warranty for our product. And the lifetime warranty was a statement to virtually everybody, all the stakeholders involved, whether it was the people making the product, the people buying the product, the people selling the product, people inside the company, of what we stood for. And it was a synthesis of the entire concept of what we had. Right. And then what we did was actually find stories about some of these DNA points that were happening in the company that could be told again and again. Because if you try to get people to memorize, particularly customers, to memorize the points of what make you different, it isn't going to happen. But what happens is that parables have been used for a long time as a way to convey points, and it also is memorable. People may not even remember the point at the time. They might think it's entertaining, but they'll pass that story on. So one of those, and I won't bore you with all of them, but one of those was about the quality of the company. And as part of having a lifetime warranty, we had to set up a warranty department where we would repair or replace something anytime we had a problem with it. Right. And they had a lot of discretion as to how they handled it, because our goal was quickly solving any issue that our customer had, because we wanted to bring the customer back. One day, a couple of people came into the warranty department, and they asked the lady, they said, who was running at Aisha, and they said, would you be able to repair this? We have to go out this weekend, but our product's failed, and we can't go if it's not fixed. And she said, of course we can repair it, because we are just like you. We enjoy our trips. We know how difficult it would be if you didn't go out there. Right. And they said, well, there's one problem. It's not your product. It's your competitor's product. And she said, well, that's okay. We'll repair it. They make great products. And we, as I said, we're just like you. We don't want you to miss your weekend trip. And they said, well, how much is it going to be? And so it's no cost. We do this because we want you to have a good trip. Right. Well, we may have been scammed or may not have been scammed, but the reality was it was a story that showed the lengths that we went to satisfy the customer, to bring the customer back, to make the customer happy, and that we believed in quality and such. And so when you tell that story, and we would tell it in our strategic planning meetings, and then it would get retold inside the company, and then it get told outside the company, it became part of the branding thing, because those stories, as I said, are memorable. Wow. And so by converting, first of all, understanding closely what the DNA is and applying it to all aspects of your company, and then repeatedly reiterating it to the market, and then finding stories to articulate it, to spread out there, was the basis of what we did. And then we coupled that with trying to be involved with audacious activities, because we thought our goals were audacious. So on one extreme, we backed a lot of adventurers, people that climb Mount Everest. I actually got a permit for a couple people to climb the Chinese side of Mount Everest. We had somebody who rode from the tip of South America to the Antarctic. And these people helped us design our products. We drank beer with them at night to talk about what we were doing. And they kind of helped define sort of the zen of the company, if you will, and they also defined some of the product. And then on the other extreme, what we did was get involved with very influential people who could help us advance our cause. So, as I mentioned, we brought technology to disrupt the industry, but we constantly brought new technology in. When Gore-Tex first came out, we were one of the first to embrace it. Most of our competitors thought it was too techy for the backwoods, but it was a great partnership. And of course, we grew and flourished as a result of it. And then when our tent sales slowed down, I went to a contact of mine, a philosopher genius by the name of Buckminster Fuller. And Buckminster Fuller was the one who founded geodesics and tensegrity and structures and a new math, and went to him and said, Bucky, geodesics encompasses a maximum amount of space with a minimum amount of materials. It sounds like a backpacking tent. He said, absolutely. I said, could you design it? He said, I'm changing the world, so I don't have time to do it. But if you put a team together, and we had a bunch of people who were Bucky followers, and he said, if you put that team together, I'll mentor them, and together we'll come up with that tent, which we did. So again, it was disruption through audacity, through doing things in a different way, which again gets you noticed. Because if you're differentiated, you get noticed. If you're like everybody else, it's very hard to get noticed, no matter what your advertising budget is.
Exactly. I'm a huge Buckminster Fuller follower and a student. So I really I'm glad that I'm talking to you, that you talked about him. I was going to ask you that. That is the insight from Buckminster Fuller and Bucky. And I just went to a workshop or a seminar where they teach Bucky. So I have read all of him. I follow a lot of stuff that he says. So I'm excited talking to you. Tell me now, with all your experience, what do you advise entrepreneurs of today? Because 20 years ago, things were very different from how we see them now. They have access to different kind of resources, but I think the basic concept remains the same. So in maybe a few lines, what is that big advice that you'd like to give to newbies who want to come into new products or new industries, or want to come up with an idea which they think is going to disrupt any space?
I would give you a quote from Goethe, the German philosopher.
Yeah.
And what he said was, whatever you can do or believe you can, begin it.
Right.
Because beginnings have genius and power and magic in it.
Right.
And that was what I would advise, because I've seen all the business plans in the world, it would seem like. I've probably seen 1,000 of them. Never does the business exactly parallel that. There's always pivots and movements or whatever. So if you're waiting for the perfect business plan, it isn't going to happen.
Right.
Also, if you have a product or a service, once you make a prototype of it, once you make a sample, no matter how rudimentary, now you start stimulating response. You start getting either a customer responding or a supplier or a vendor, and now you've created a dialogue.
Right.
But it won't happen while you're just sitting there dreaming.
Right. I believe that completely. I think it's always make the first move, go out and do whatever you can, and then eventually it just evolves on its own, and be open to whatever comes your way. Have a framework, but work within that. So which is good. So what was your most difficult lesson through North Face? I read about your 90-10 rule, so I'm interested in learning about that.
Okay, well, there are probably two rules that tie there. Actually, there's three numbers that I use a lot. The first one, 90-10, that you referred to, is just the concept that in today's very connected world, no company does everything on its own. It outsources a lot of the work that it does.
Right.
The usual thinking is that's a 50-50 deal. I'm paying you to do your side, I'll do my side, and it's 50-50 and we'll get it done. My experience has been that if you want to be successful, 90% of the responsibility has to be mine and 10% theirs. Now, it doesn't seem fair because you're paying them to do their side, but
Right.
the reality is you get let down more often than not. So by assuming 90% of it and doing more than your share of the work, you can go to the market comfortably knowing you're going to succeed.
Right. Right.
A second number that I put in there is what I call the 80-20 rule. And I'm not talking about the Pareto principle, but my 80-20 rule is don't tell people your problems, because 80% don't care and 20% are glad you've got them. But in reality, the 80-20 rule does exist. Managing a business is very difficult, getting your arms around it. However, if you realize that 20% of what you do, 20% of what you sell, 20% of the expenses you have basically result in 80% of the results,
Right.
then if you can identify that 20%, you can manage that, and that is important enough. And the rest of it you can get back to later on.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third one, I just call it 35, but basically what it boils down to is that everybody assumes there's economies of scale when they start a business. I'm not getting enough margin and whatever, but when I get large, there's going to be a lot more there. I don't believe it happens automatically. And so I set up a number that every time I increased our sales by 30%, I would target reducing my SG&A, sales, general, and administrative expense by 5 percentage points, 5% of that amount. So if our SG&A was 30% of our sales, we'd reduce it by 1.5%. And by setting that target, we then forced ourselves into lowering the cost. All of those were things that we found because what we were hoping would happen just automatically didn't happen.
Right. I really like the 90-10 thing, because a lot of times when we give it away to people, we expect them to do things the way we and it doesn't work that way. And
No.
80-20 we all know, because 80% doesn't care, 20% are happy that we are in trouble. So that's great. So now, what's your greatest achievement so far?
My greatest achievement, hopefully, is in front of me, but the one that I like most, 11 of the people who worked for me ended up running businesses in the outdoor business, and I feel most proud about that. None of them had a business background when they came to the North Face, but they ultimately ended up learning that through the process that we had. So I'm very pleased about that, because ultimately educating and helping people be better in themselves is a way to propagate great results.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm very pleased, because as I'm listening to you, is as if I've got tons of books behind me. This is better than reading any book. So we've got the cream here. So I'm quite happy with that. You've
Well,
been writing books.
if my books are there, then
Yeah, yeah, I'm coming to that, because
and
you've written two very interesting books, and you've written this highly acclaimed book on leadership called Conquering the North Face: An Adventure in Leadership, and you just released a second business book called Almost: 12
right.
Electric Months Chasing a Silicon Valley Dream. Now, I think you're going to be demystifying a lot of Silicon Valley just now as I speak with you.
Hmm.
Uh, which one do you want to talk about first? The first book, I think you can just let us know what it is about, and then I want to get to Almost, because I understand you've spoken about some things which usually people do not like to speak about.
Right. Well, the first book was about successes, and it takes both of them are nonfiction narratives written about true stories brought together in the way I was talking about in terms of branding. Believing that stories and parables convey messages, and you can be entertained by them and never even worry about the message, but it'll come back to you at some point. So, embedded in there were stories that I found, many of them about the outdoors, that created success.
Right.
And then I flipped that over to Almost, which is a book written about failure. And it was 12 months that I spent inside a company trying to make it successful. And it should have been successful. It had people from the best universities in the U.S., Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, Naval Academy. It had two astronauts. It had millions of dollars put into the company. It had a unique product. It was making a portable, miniaturized power system, starting with lithium-ion batteries and going all the way to fuel cells that could be embedded in consumer products. And as you know, one of the problems with most of your consumer products is the battery life runs out. And
Right.
this had much higher energy density. Well, without getting deeply into the product, what happened was, despite all of the reasons that we should have succeeded, the company failed. And what I try to identify in this book through stories is what the failure points were. And there are many points that you fail in business,
Right.
but the 5 points that were in there, one was the problem that we had, which we never had a team. We had a split between the engineers and the salespeople, and the CEO who was running the company never wanted the two to be reconciled.
Yeah.
And they're entirely different cultures.
Right.
A second point that we had in there was that when you run out of money, you make bad decisions, and we did. What happened was because the company overspent, and I'll come back to why they overspent, but when the company overspent, it didn't have money to do the final engineering on its products. And so when the products went to market, there was a recall. And simple manufacturing engineering would have resolved it before it went out there. But there was no money, so you decided to let it go without that. A third one was the myth of overnight success, and I think most people believe when they look at Silicon Valley that everybody's going to start a company that's a unicorn or highly successful.
Right.
And the reality is, 80% of the companies don't make it there, and it's okay because in Silicon Valley, failure is not a problem. You can come back. In many other parts of the world, as I'm sure you've seen, Abha, it's not acceptable. But in Silicon Valley, think of people like Steve Jobs, Mark Andreessen, who started Netscape, and now he runs Andreessen Horowitz Venture Capital. Peter Thiel and Elon Musk were tied up with a guy, Max Levchin, who started PayPal. They failed too, but all those people got funded and they came back. So it isn't bad, but if you read some of the things that I've written about, maybe you won't repeat my errors, so maybe you have a lesser chance of doing it.
Right.
But the mythology that exists is that everybody has overnight success. Well, in our case, at our company, what happened, Artica, what happened was one of the big Silicon Valley companies, the biggest one in consumer goods, came to visit the company. And immediately the CEO extrapolated that we were going to sell, to use his words, for $50 to $100 million by the end of the year. Well, it was fallacy. We didn't have a finished product. He said, well, they'll be interested in the patents. Well, I said, they have so much money, they don't have to worry about the patents. They want to see a product. They can buy us later on. It's still a rounding error. But immediately we overspent all of the money we had in the company because all the disciplines went away, and there was no more discipline that existed in the business. And as a result, we ran out of money before we were able to accomplish any of the things that we had. And so those were all embedded in there. I try to wrap it in both the prologue and epilogue to talk about the culture of Silicon Valley, in which failure does exist, but it's okay because this unique environment, which I alluded to, where you can fail and come back, allows people to take much bigger risk.
Right.
And the higher the risk that you take, the higher the probability of failure.
Right.
And in parts of the world where I've worked, like New Zealand and Ireland and UK and whatever, that's not an acceptable strategy. So what you see is incrementalism. People just take small steps because they don't want to disrupt, because the probability of success is higher, but the probability of denting the universe, to use Steve Jobs' word, is much less.
Right.
And so we were trying to do it. We didn't need to fail. We didn't need to make those mistakes. We didn't need to have the hubris that was associated with the culture clash, people thinking because they'd gone to the best universities that they were going to get rich and believing in those. So the story is 12 months, going from a start where we thought we were going to be grand to the unfortunate clashes that happened and the end of not making it. But I think it's worthwhile for people to read because it does reflect what happens more often than not.
Right. And you mentioned Steve Jobs, and we've all heard his story about how he was in dealing with his people.
Yes.
We've got the other side of the story. We've got the good side to him, and we've got this fancy side which says, oh, he was very, very harsh. You've had experiences with your own people, and you also say that it's important to be able to cut down on people who do not serve well or who do not
Right.
work well. So what's your take on that?
Well,
Are you as bad as Steve Jobs?
now, I mean, unfortunately, Steve Jobs had such a rough edge. I mean, that's why he got kicked out in the first place, because he couldn't work with anybody. But when he came back, he learned how to work with some people. He just was very abrasive. But he then surrounded himself with a few people to be the buffers. But he made the final calls on what was going to happen. I'm more of a participative manager and believe others need to come in, and I want to hear what they're doing. However, the way people react in a company is probably along a bell-shaped curve.
Right.
20% of the people are superstars, 20% of the people aren't making it, and the other 60% wait to see who gets supported.
Right.
If you spend all of your time trying to make the poor people average
Right.
at the expense of focusing on the superstars.
Right.
Over time, the 60% realize that, the way I get noticed around here is by being the problem child.
Mhm.
And so you gravitate that way. So what you do is try to make a change by removing the people who are not star performers to be able to allow the other people to go along. Now, star performers can be a lot of things, and doesn't mean that they aren't brilliant, doesn't mean that they don't have great ideas.
Right.
In fact, at the end of each of my strategic planning meetings, which we'd have every 2 years at North Face
Right.
and in other companies, what I would say is, I hope we were so clear in what we decided that some of you leave. And the reason for that is that in a company, you can only have one direction.
Right.
And obviously, there's more than one direction that companies can go in ideas, but we can't have you pulling against us. We've
Mhm.
decided what our course is going to be for the next couple of years, and what we need is either you to be on the bus or off the bus. If you're off the bus, you should go some other place which embraces your philosophies that suit you better. And those can be the 20% who are bad performers. But if you liberate them and frankly help them find a job somewhere else, and you say, listen, you just don't fit here,
Right.
then you end up with a team that understands the superstars who have your philosophy are the ones you're going to back,
Right.
and that becomes the ethos of the company.
That's nice. I think participative management and communication and all these things. Because I think we've heard these stories about Steve Jobs, but we have people like yourself and a lot of other people who now understand that it's you have to have star performers in the company.
Yes.
Otherwise, you yourself they will probably pull you back and
Hmm.
pull everything back in the company, which is right. So you've used the word almost as the title of the book. And
Correct.
almost, please explain because, and this is the idea of failure for all those because Silicon Valley, everybody goes there to change the world, but then there are some people who do not manage to do that. They have a chance to come back, but when you use it, they almost do it, if I can
Yes.
understand it correctly. So why did you choose the word almost? It's very indicative, but still, I would like to hear from you, from the author. What did you have in mind?
Well, almost is something that sort of sears the soul. If you talk about it, it's having these great aspirations and not get there.
Right.
Everybody talks about this continuum that that's success and failure, and it may not be a continuum. What I would tell you is mediocrity is closer to failure than anything else.
Right.
What failure and success are side by side. It's striving for the greatness and then missing it. Almost is, oh, we were there. If we'd only done this, or if we'd only done that,
Right.
if we'd managed our cash better, we would have been better. We would have been able to be at the finish line. All those things. And so, what I'm saying is that this failure is right next to success,
Mhm.
and almost is the failure.
Mhm.
Failure is not at the opposite end of success.
Right. It's part of it. So that's great. So did was it easy for you to get failure out there? Did the
Oh,
publishers feel happy about it?
heavens, no, no. It's just like everything else. But I went to a number of publishers, and one of them, I remember saying to me, he said nobody wants to read about failure, and I said, well, to the contrary, when I speak, and I do speak a lot at various conferences and what have you, inevitably a question comes up about failure. What was your biggest mistake, or what would you have done differently,
Right.
or what did you do? And I said, to me, that indicates interest. And they said, well, yeah, but go into a bookstore. Go
Uh-huh.
into a bookstore. There's racks and racks of books on success. Do you see any on failure?
Right.
And, my response was no, and I also see the bookstores failing. So, maybe that's one of the reasons. But so it was difficult to find somebody that really wanted to deal with that. But finally, I found Motivational Press, and they came out, and I've had great response to it. I've sold thousands of books, and I've given a number of speeches around the country. I've given a couple in Europe about the concept of failure, about the book itself,
Mhm.
about the fact that it's Silicon Valley is a unique ecosystem. And that unique ecosystem, failure is one of the elements that a lot of people don't talk about, but
Right.
allows it to liberate and as I said, using Steve Jobs' term, dent the universe or strive for denting the universe.
Right. 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 And you really sort of you say you enjoy working with the younger lot.
Yeah.
Some way, I mean, they're probably not as experienced as you are, but what inspires you to do that?
Well, you know, you always want to help other people because
Right.
that's the goal. And you know, I always believed in this world. It was an article I read in the Harvard Business Review one time about they called it. It was not very academic, but it was the difference between the pie enlargers and the pie slicers. And they talked about some people who believe, sort of a Malthusian world that there's nothing other than what you see, and
Right.
what somebody else gets is taken from you.
Right.
And the pie enlargers, which I fall into that category, are the believer that great ideas create huge, never explored markets before.
Yes.
And so by giving wings to other people, by encouraging other people, what I believe is that's where the great opportunities and the changes are going to be.
Absolutely.
And being near Silicon Valley, you see that a lot. And part of it is this inspiration to dent the universe. But think about the speed of change of society. 95% of all patents ever issued have been issued in the last 5 years.
Hmm.
And that is an exponential rate of change, of growth, and that's going to continue.
Hmm.
And the people who embrace that, the people who aren't afraid of dealing with that, with the uncertainty that comes with it, are
Yes.
the people who are going to make quantum leaps into the future.
Wow. So I think a lot of people should read your book and also listen to this interview while you're saying, because I think we need to learn all that. So thank you very much, Hap. I am so happy speaking with you, because this is I read through your building North Face, building that brand, selling it off, and getting it from zero to 2.5 billion. I knew you had some really great nuggets, and you've shared some really interesting stuff today. I would request everybody who's watching and listening, please go look at Hap Klopp's book. It's called Almost 12. Let me just get it right. 12 electric months chasing a Silicon Valley dream. You will have some interesting insights and very powerful ones at that to really start off something and just get on the bus and just get going, because from Hap you can learn that it's not going to be that difficult as long as you're persistent. You get there, you put your systems together, have your values together, have a good direction, and have some star performers sitting in there. He's got great advice to give in there. Hap, thank you very much
Abha, thank
for
you.
your time, and thank you very much for sharing your insights. Serious breakout. I think this is serious breakout. So thank you very much.
Take care.
Yeah.